Good afternoon again, everybody. I'm sure you're probably sick of seeing me already, if you can actually see me. So I was very pleased to introduce Deb Tack, and I can't find the word that how excited I am to introduce the speaker. Not only is this gentleman amazing and an author, but I have a little secret. I met him my freshman year in college at Penn State Altoona. Now, I was going to tell you some stories, and he said I could if I wanted to, but I think he has some of his own that he could probably share with you. But let me just tell you, he was a legend at Penn State Altoona for many reasons, and I'll leave it at that, and then I'll read his actual bio. Michael is a rehab counselor and specialist, an advocate, and as you can see, an author. He has books out in the lobby. I hope you take advantage of purchasing one of those. He holds an undergraduate degree in psychology and a graduate degree in rehab counseling. He's been working in the field of vocational rehabilitation for 20 years at the Hiram G. Andrews Center in Johnstown, PA. He works primarily with the Cognitive Skills Enhancement Program, but also provides support for the Center for Assistive and Rehabilitative Technology, along with advocacy and outreach. He has spent the bulk of his career working with young adults with disabilities. His career has centered around a comprehensive approach to employment and self-advocacy, which includes cognitive therapy, assistive technology, life and social skills, sexuality and intimacy, along with many other topics. The overall goal is to empower individuals with disabilities to be independent, to have an active voice in the world around them, in the hopes that a taste of empowerment will lead to a thirst for independence. He sits on several boards of directors, and his personal interests include spending time traveling, motivational speaking, playing chess, writing, and enjoying the company of friends and family, particularly his two nephews. And again, as you'll see out in the lobby, he published his memoir, Challenge the Moment, in 2019. Please give me a warm welcome for Michael Keel.
Well, thanks everyone. Oh, this is working. It's perfectly positioned, Heather. We weren't sure if the microphone was going to be placed well. So I want to thank Chad Lasser and the executive team for organizing this. A great event. You guys have a great turnout today. I especially want to thank Heather for pulling me in and recruiting me and having me here. And I want to have a secondary thank you to Heather for using my professional headshot from my job and not one of the college pictures I'm sure is sitting in her shoebox at the bottom of the closet, which probably would not have ended well. But yeah, we knew each other back in the 1900s. So I figured I'd talk to you guys a little bit today about 3 moments and 3 tools to stay with the theme of abilities and workforce and success. But to get there, I need to tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to be sitting in front of you, yakking at you and taking up your time today. So I'll get right to it. In my sophomore year at Penn State, in April, as a matter of fact, in spring, near the end of spring term, I got shot in the neck, just wrong place, wrong time. Got into an argument with a guy at a convenience store about 4 o'clock in the morning. He pulled out a gun and point blank side of the neck. So I'm paralyzed from the neck down, from about as far as I can reach my chin. It's all the further I can move or feel, about my collarbone. My spinal cord injury is level C345. The bullet went in right in the middle there and did like a starburst. So there's bone and bullet fragment through C3, C4, C5, which is why I've got the range and ability I have. I spent the next 2 months in a ICU in Johnstown, a trauma center. And then the following 2 months after that, in a rehab center in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, I made a point to tell you that my I was in the end of my sophomore year, or sophomore term in April, and we were just ahead of finals. That's important. I'll explain why later. But all my professors gave me the grades I had without giving me a whole bunch of incompletes. I had a good enough rapport, and they saw I was actually working by that time. My first 2 or 3 semesters, I was not so much. But by the time the 4th one rolled around, I was playing rugby, I was pledging a fraternity, and I was knuckling down and doing really well. So they gave me those credit for those classes, which I said I'll talk more about later. But so in those first couple months in ICU, I was pretty wrapped up and pretty terrified, pretty angry, pretty paralyzed. One of the things I tell people that gets a chuckle is the only 2 things on my mind when I first realized my predicament was I was going to kill the guy that shot me by bullet, by bat, by bare hands, by my hands alone. I was going to figure out a way out of that hospital room, out of that bed, and I was going to kill him. And the only other thing on my mind was, am I ever going to be able to have sex again? Well, that's probably what you would expect from a 19-year-old. Well, the anger took over and took front seat. And it got so bad to the point that the psychosomatic part of it was really, really affecting me. I wasn't breathing on my own. I had a trachea and a machine breathing for me. I had a punctured lung. When I got shot, I went face first towards one of those like red cement poles in front of the convenience store. So big gash in the front of my face. So I was pretty well banged up. And the fact that I was so consumed with wanting to kill this guy, so angry with my situation, everything else was shutting down. Like I was having panic attacks, and my body wasn't accepting the air that the ventilator was pumping in. So they induced me into a coma to sort of shut everything down. Didn't work all that well because I was still a little bit aware, and they closed my mouth and put Vaseline on my lips, which made me realizing that I had no air moving anywhere. Made me feel like I was suffocating. But anyway, so I was so consumed with anger that there was nothing else. Now my dad had stayed there every night. Never left the ICU room. And he would sit there, and he got pretty good at pulling me out of those panic attacks, calming me down whenever I was really going off the deep end and fixated on all this anger. One day I remember him sitting there, and this is moment number 1. He had his hand on mine and a little tiny cross in between, and just talking to me about, trying to calm down and trying to stay here and now. And at one point he just looked at me and said, "You don't have enough room in your heart for love and hate. One's going to consume the other. You need to choose." And a lot of people will talk about feeling like a giant weight was lifted off their shoulders. This felt like something came from inside and just pulled right out. And it was almost like instant. And I can see a whole lot clearer. Unfortunately, the next thing that I saw was the reality of what was going on and what I was faced with, which was being paralyzed, completely paralyzed, unable to breathe on my own, unable to call for help if I needed, which spiraled me down into a very dark pit of depression and sadness and hopelessness, to the point where, moment number 2, I remember my dad walking past the foot of the bed on his way out of the room and asking him to pull the plug on the ventilator and just let me go. The fear, the pain, all of the things were just too much. And I remember the look on his face, which was gut-wrenching to this day. And all he could get out was, "That's not fair." And walked the rest of the way out. And I remember laying there, tears coming down my eyes, thinking, he's right. He's right. That's not fair. There are more people that out there. I'm not the only one going through this. There are more people out there. When I say that I was, we were joking that I had lots of friends and there was lots going on in college. Those young people swarmed the hospital. There were stacks and piles of 18, 19, 20-year-olds lined up in the hospital room. The doctors had to shuffle my fraternity brothers and rugby buddies to a different floor and, barter with them, say, give them regular updates to get them out of the way. My family was coming in from other states, and there was just a ubiquitous presence of family, friends, and support everywhere. And they were all going through it too. And that's when I realized that it wasn't just about me. That moment, definitely moment number two. So I turned a bit of a corner there and saw another little bit of a light and started to move forward. And they shuffled me down to Atlanta, Georgia, because all of the rehabs in my area, there was only one that would accept me being on a ventilator and as boogered up as I was. So I went down to Atlanta, Georgia, and they had such an excellent program for rehab. It was like a block schedule. Like all the rehab stuff was like a college setup. From 8 to 8:50, I had physical therapy. From 9 to 9:50, I had occupational therapy. From 10 to 10:50, I had skincare and bladder care class. And another one was sex ed. Another one was rec therapy. Another one was counseling and psychiatry. Like all of the things, block by block by block. And that's where they focused on really pushing to get me off a ventilator. They unloaded with all the things that I had to do. But the one thing that they did not do, and this is moment number three, they did not steal my hope. And I went down there full on denial, full on, all right, I'm going to walk again someday. I'm going to walk. I'm going to be the first quadriplegic that makes a full recovery, and I'm going to walk out of there, and I'm going to get back to playing rugby. At least doctors and nurses and PTs and OTs, these professionals, they knew damn well I wasn't going to walk again. They're looking at X-rays and MRIs and CT scans that show the spinal cord coming down out of my brainstem, then a whole bunch of bones and bullets and pieces, and then empty space where my spinal cord should be, and then nothing, and then spinal cord and bullets and bone and fry. Again, there's a gap. So they knew full well there was no walking. They never said that. They never said, you just have to accept that you're not going. You just have to accept it. You just have to move on. Never said that. What they did say is, there's a whole lot of things facing you right now. These challenges right here in the moment. These are the things that are in your way. You don't have to, forsake a goal of wanting to walk or wanting something way down, but don't sacrifice today for what you're hoping for tomorrow. Ironically enough, that's where the name of the book came from, was all those moments I was being challenged in. And my stubbornness probably fed into that too. Of, all right, you're going to lay down a gauntlet in front of me. All right, I'm going to tackle it. I'm going to go full bore after it. And those three moments, each one of them bringing me back to the here and now, to what was presently in front of me. Offered challenges, offered insight, offered an opportunity to pick a battle, and more importantly, win a battle. Win an important battle, breathing on my own, getting off a ventilator, learning how to sit up and control a chair. They used to have to wrap a binder around my stomach to keep my blood pressure up so I wouldn't pass out when I sat up. At 50, I get a little bit of a belly. I might want to grab that binder back again. But all those little challenges, I was winning these little battles, and it never dawned on me until quite a few years later, that all those little battles were helping me win a war that I didn't even know I was fighting. that war, that battle to get back to a regular life, to a life of purpose, to a life of productivity and engagement. I didn't even know that's what I was shooting for. I was just shooting to get out of rehab. I was just shooting to sit upright. Speaking of sitting upright, that leads to tool number one. A chair that caters to my one strength. The one thing I have left is my head. And I've got a chair that tracks the movement of my head. There's a motion detector in the headrest. So it feeds to the one muscle I've got left, so I can control this. I've pulled many pranks on people, convincing them I've got a microchip in my brain or magnets sewn in the back of my skull. That's always been one of my favorite pranks to pull, is to convince people alternate ways that I drive the chair. But I'll let you guys off the hook because I don't have a whole lot of time to drag it along. But this chair is tool number one that was propelling me forward into, now that I've got a sense of accomplishment and I'm on my way moving forward, how do I get to point A to point B? How do I start moving and grooving? Right. So about half or 3/4 of the way through August, I got home on a Wednesday night and around midnight. So Thursday was spent, how do I get a bed and a Hoyer lift in a living room? Where am I gonna live in my parents' house? How am I gonna manage this? It was all logic and placement and all right, we got problem solved. Friday, however, 36 hours later, two of my fraternity brothers, my big brother and one of the guys I pledged with, came up to visit on Friday around lunchtime. And I don't remember if we just talked about it then or if I had been thinking about it in rehab, but remember I said all my professors had given me my grades from that spring semester. We realized that as far as Penn State's system was concerned, I was still in college. The spring term counted. It was just waiting for me to schedule a couple classes because I was still enrolled. So we jumped into the truck and headed down to Penn State. Now, when I say jumped into the truck, I literally mean like I had no modified van. I didn't even have my own wheelchair. I had a loaner wheelchair. So these two picked me up out of the chair, set me in the front of my dad's truck, took the chair, bungee corded it in the back of the truck, and drove down to Altoona, then pulled me back out and put me back together. And I went into the student services place and told them I'd like to schedule some classes. And I don't know how to do that. And they looked at me. This is a hot minute after the ADA was passed. They looked at me and went, neither do we. So can we figure it out? They said, absolutely. So we worked together to figure out, how I was going to keep taking classes. Scheduled a couple classes. I was enrolled in the school that fall and never missed a beat. So they picked me up out of the chair, stuck me in front of the truck, drove down to the fraternity house, and then pulled me back together again. And there was about, 8 or 10 guys and 5 or 6 girls, and they're all hanging out. And I was filling them in on what I did over my summer break story. And this is one of my favorite stories to tell. Speaking of getting back to a life of purpose and getting back to a normal life. So when I was in rehab, they taught me how to do all this stuff, how to take care of myself as a quadriplegic. Right? And one of those things was that I had a straight cath every 4 hours or so. And for anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's exactly what it sounds like. Take a tube and insert it up the urethra and drain all the urine out. So I'm sitting down there, 36 hours out of rehab and having a couple beers and talking and thinking to myself, they taught me how to straight cath and how often I needed it. They never told me how often to do it if I'm drinking beer. It's probably more often. That's probably a safe bet. So I told these guys I was going to have to take off, and they wanted to know why. And I'm not shy, so I told them. 36 hours out of rehab, 18, 19-year-old fraternity brothers asked me if I could show them so I could stick around. And they straight capped me into an empty vodka bottle, and I stuck around for the rest of the evening. So that was my reintroduction into, okay, this is going to be a fun ride. So I started school again, and OVR had a counselor that introduced me to some of the AT and assistive technology out there, which is tool number 2. If chair was tool number 1, voice recognition was tool number 2, right? Back then it was drag and dictate. It was discrete speech, meant that I could talk and it would type the words that I talked. Unfortunately, this discrete speech was 1 word at a time. I wrote a 130-page paper in graduate school, 1 word at a time, was mind-numbing. Luckily now it's advanced enough that it's called free speech, and I can talk like I'm talking to you right now, and it would type out and spell out exactly as I'm saying. That's tool number 2. That allowed me, opened up all kinds of doors to employment. So after getting back into school and rocking and rolling, I spent another year at Penn State, and then moved up to Edinburgh and got a master's degree in counseling. And as I was starting my master's degree, I opened up a small business with a buddy of mine, and did a health and fitness center. And then my graduate internship rolled right into the job I have now. So if the chair is tool number 1, try to move along quick so we have a couple minutes for question and answers. But so if chair is tool number 1 and voice recognition was tool number 2, tool number 3 was communication. It was working with others. It was collaboration. It was those fraternity brothers straight capping me. It was talking to the student services about arranging classes in that first term. And wouldn't you know it, that first class I had on the 2nd floor with no elevator. So what did they do? They moved the class to the 1st floor. No one batted an eye. It was an easy solution. And it taught me that common courtesy breeds common sense and vice versa. And I've embraced that in the 30 years since. And I've relied on coworkers and collaboration, even just as much as my voice recognition and this chair. So where did I leave off now? Okay. So as getting into a job, well, I get a couple minutes. Let me back up a minute. So a little bit about how I ended up writing that book. The health and fitness center we started was a godsend because that was one of my coping measures, my coping skills before I got hurt. I would lift weights. I would play rugby. I would bang into stuff. As an 18, 19-year-old, rugby player, that's how I got all those inside out. I would just run into other people or lift weights or do things like that. After I got hurt, sitting in a $20,000 wheelchair, that doesn't end well if I do that. If I run into things and other people, things break. So I had to figure out different coping mechanisms. That health and fitness center let me get back in that environment of workout and bodybuild and physicality, which was cool. And it was a unique perspective. It was a unique way to do that. And I realized that was an essential thing, was approaching things from a unique standpoint, but it wasn't enough. So I started writing. And when I first started writing, it was just puke on a page. It was rambling words that didn't make sense. Sometimes it was just a short story. Sometimes it was a a wish or something I despised or something I aspired for. Other times it came out as a poem. And then I started posting them on social media every year on the anniversary of my injury to just reinforce what I've taken in the years since, how I've benefited in the years since. And there's a whole long part of the book called Automatic Triggers that I talk about that. But that's how I ended up writing the book. I think I was shooting to finish the yakking and yammering by noon, so I'm coming close. But I wanted to make sure I included this. I don't prepare a lot for talks. I sort of just get up and try to flow with what the moment tells me I should. But I was thinking a lot about this last couple of days, and I wanted to end with this. I like throwing out this quote because it means a lot. I think it says a lot, but I also like it because it was taught to me by my little sister. It used to be the tagline in her emails. And it's a quote by Kurt Hahn, and it says, "There is more in us than we know. If we can be made to see it, then perhaps for the rest of our lives, we'll be unwilling to settle for less." Unwilling to settle for less. Think about that. Life throws curveballs. I mean, that's what it does, and it is good at it. It's the things we never see coming that derail us, that take us off our game plan. But if we challenge those moments, if we challenge them through, I like humor personally, but if we challenge them with everything we've got through humor or organization and hyper focus or collaborating with others or whatever method suits you to challenge those curveballs when they come flying at you, challenge them with everything you have, then you will never ever have to settle for less. That's my fire away.
Fairly certain you guys are going to make me run around the room, so go ahead, start over here.
I like questions, but just be forewarned, I'm rather blunt. So
raising hands if you have questions. I'll start since no one has their hand up. Tell us about your experience with finding a house after college.
This is a good one. This is something that relates right to HRC. So when I first moved up to Edinburgh, like I said, I'm not very organized, so it was sort of last minute, and there weren't a whole lot of places available. There was one, this neat little house right near Lakeside that had like 2 small steps. I thought, my dad's a contractor, I could put a removable ramp up there, and we looked in the windows. It's perfect. Got a hold of the guy, and the guy said, "Oh yeah, give us a price." Told us all about it. And right before he hung up, he asked my attendant, who was on the phone, said, "Oh, by the way, are either you or your roommate disabled?" I said, "Well, yeah, actually, my roommate's a guy I take care of. He's in a wheelchair." Flipped a 180 and said he would not rent to us because a litany of excuses. The doors weren't wide enough. So I can get through an average door. Well, my insurance won't cover it. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm a hot minute out of rehab. I'm still 20 years old. I'd only been out of rehab for like less than a year. So my dad sort of took the reins and started, picking this fight. And the guy was an idiot, to say the least. So he came up with some really dumb excuses. But my dad went and started reaching out to all the right resources, calling, a couple local politicians, but one of them, the biggest, gun that he contacted was the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, who jumped in and took over, and over a span of probably 5 years, drug that guy into hearing after hearing after hearing, made his life miserable for quite a while, that he wasn't allowed to rent it to anyone. If he wasn't going to rent it to someone with a disability, he wasn't going to rent it to anyone, and he didn't. And he also got hit with, it was something like $10,000 fine or something like that, that I had them donate to the Edinburgh's Office of Students with Disabilities. But
I have a question back here too.
so if you remember, keep in mind, if no one told you that you've done a good job today, you have done a great job today, and you've done an empowering job today.
So my question is, I would imagine that the mental part of it was even more difficult than adapting to the physical reality. And I'm curious if, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you still have dark days where you find yourself trying to, like, your brain starts to go back into depressive mode? And how do you keep yourself motivated? What are your strategies for keeping positive?
I usually tell people I use a healthy balance of humor and denial with a little bit of alcohol mixed in. Yes, the short answer there. The short answer there is yes. I have plenty of dark days. There are different things that eat away at me and irritate me, and that cause difficult days. Hell, some days I find myself waking up and still trying to, wiggle my hand or wiggle my arm. But one of the other realistic things that does kick in is perspective and comparison. I remember early on in the trauma center, in the ICU in Johnstown, nightmare after nightmare, waking up to a reality that was no different than my nightmares. That was creepy to the bone. And realizing now that the things that are bugging me or depressing or making me sad are things that are temporary, and they're things that I will eventually get around, because I've got a track record of 30 years of doing it. So it takes a little bit of effort to stay in the moment and check to make sure I realize that, but I get there.
After that, we have to ask something.
Yep.
In the last several months or year, what is the most uplifting and positive experience you've had that has continued to encourage you?
Oh man. There's a bunch of them. I work with young people with disabilities that are overcoming their own obstacles in the moment on a daily basis. I'll give you one from the last couple of weeks. There's a young person I started working with. She's 2 strikes into a 3-strike behavior contract, and if she's late one more time, she's got to go home. And that we sat down and hashed out a really strict schedule that she had to work really hard to abide by. It's been 4 weeks, and she was late once last week but it was gonna excuse things. She was only a couple minutes late, but 4 weeks. And the previous 4 weeks, she was probably late 35 times. But that's huge. And she might not make it. She might end up, struggling, have to hit the reset button. But that little insight into, I just did it for 4 weeks. If I can do it for 4 weeks, I can do it for 5. If I can do it for 5 weeks, at some point I can do it for 6. Things like that. I find those daily. And they're everywhere if you look for them. They really are. Another one. All right, we have deer in our backyard. There's a mother that had triplets, a mother that had twins, and a mother that had a single baby. And those suckers bounce around the backyard. So there's another good one.
All right, I've got a question from one of our online attendees. In your experience as a rehab counselor, what are the biggest barriers to employment that you see? And what progress have you seen for employment for people with disabilities?
My personal view is a lowering of the bar. People lower the bar too often for someone with a disability. They underestimate them. They pity or they don't have high enough expectations. The talent pool in the population of people with disabilities is not only untapped and unrecognized, it is unbelievable. I think if we can let the general public see that, then maybe they'll understand they shouldn't settle for less either. That's my thought is there's people don't recognize just how valuable someone with a disability, the potential they have, if just from life experience in some of the different fields. There's an old quote, impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. You know, when you're faced with some pretty heavy obstacles that you've got to figure out a way to navigate through, over, or around, you get pretty good at it, and you get a skill set that allows you to transfer that to other problems.
The obstacle is the way. Very stoic. It's that you're pointing out, right?
It is stoic. It's actually Marcus Aurelius, I think.
Let's give our keynote a hand again. And I'm reminded of two quotes, one by a person that has really resonated with me pretty much all my life. Mother Teresa has a quote in which she articulates, there's joy in transcending self to serve others. And there's another quote that's actually rooted in the African philosophy tradition. And that African proverb is, the lion's story will never be known if the hunter is the one that tells it. We thank you for telling your story of resiliency, your story of perseverance, and your story of a maker's mark in Hennessy. So, you know, sometimes, you know, we need that levity. We need that moment. Thank you for all that you've done. For the audience here, not because of what he shared, but also because of what he shared. Michael and I were talking prior to this, the PHRC, we're always getting books to inform us, whether that's books by Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, whether that's a book by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. Most recently, we had Ron Ronstein's book, Color of Law. We're going to be purchasing 100 of his books for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We have our procurement officer here right now, Carrie Simmons. We won't be doing it today because we're at a budget impasse. And I know the camera's on, but we will be purchasing it, just not today. But seriously, on behalf of this governor, this lieutenant governor, and individuals all over the Commonwealth, and in particular here at the PHRC, all three of our regional offices, thank you for inspiring us with your keynote. And just like everyone else, we have a token of appreciation for you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Very cool.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
All right, so I have the privilege to let everyone know it's lunchtime. Please enjoy lunch. We will get started again at 1:15. We'll have some videos playing from the